Welcome to another lap guide for the Camel GT series here at iRacing. For week 6, we are at Mid-Ohio and the chicane layout. So before I go into details of the lap, here it is without commentary. Okay, so lap time here was a 1:12:653. We are on 81 degree Fahrenheit track temperature. This week we are also in morning weather, just as we were last season at Mid-Ohio. So a bit of experimentation with setups, and I tried working with 9-wing. This lap was actually run with a 10-wing, and I found the most consistency and actually even the most speed on the straight with 10 wing, or at least that sector. And let me kind of explain why. Uh, my personal best on the straight, that sector 2, was set initially with the 9 wing, and that was actually in cooler weather. And as I went through further rounds of testing and working with the setup, I actually found that I could get around the keyhole and get a quicker exit to turn to the keyhole and earlier throttle, and actually beat my previous best using 10 wing on the straight. And it was actually warmer weather for that, and so that was enough to kind of reassure that I think 10 wing is very good on this track. You can get away with 9 wing in the cooler track temps, but if you're looking for consistency and keeping the car on the track, I think you're going to have better success with 10 wing. So experiment with that if you'd like. But the setups that I share for this track, both qualifying and race, will be 10 wing setups. I've tested them on from cool to warm temperatures, and I'm pretty comfortable with where the car is at this point. So let's go back to the start of the lap here. And before I go to turn 1, let's talk about the exit to the final corner. It's obviously set up, it's important to get a nice exit to the final corner of the carousel to get on throttle and to get your lap started out. So let's start from there this time and go over that exit, and we'll actually do this a couple times, once on the outlap and on the tail end of the lap. So as you come around the carousel, you want to be getting back to throttle right at about this point. You can see this last section of curbing starting to just get back on throttle pretty lightly, and you want to get back to full throttle as soon as you can, although you're probably going to need to lift just a bit coming around the curbing here to the right, and then back to full throttle right away. The car is now up into fourth gear at this point. And actually, before I forget, optimal splits, a 1:12:1, but bear in mind that's with around 79 or so degree track temp, just for reference. And there's the individual sector times. I like to talk about laps and sectors often because it helps me find a balance between various parts of the track, and then I can see how setup changes are affecting. What I am doing my testing, when I'm doing working with setups and practice, what I always run is session optimal sector in the delta, and that gives me a better feel for how the car is performing for that session. and how adjustments might impact how the car feels and how it might perform versus prior runs. So anyway, that's just a tip there that I recommend using if not using already. I know people have different opinions and how they like to use the Delta, if on at all. And for me, it helps with consistency, even during a race, to kind of help keep an eye on how the car is performing, and if I feel like I may be over driving it or missing missing time in certain sections of the track, it's good to kind of help gauge that. Anyway, so let's go up to turn one. So in fourth gear. So braking point is the 100. So threshold braking happens actually just before that, about 30% or so braking. It's a very quick braking and then release as you turn into the corner here. You want to obviously carry as much speed through the corner here as you can. So what you're going to be aiming to do is get the car over to the curbing here on the left. And in this case, I actually touch the curbing lightly. You can actually ride a tire all around the curbing with no off track. I wouldn't say it's a faster line, but you could do that. I would actually say that it's better to touch or even get up on the curbing a little bit than it is to run wide, however. If you run wide, a couple of problems with that. You can't get back to full throttle as soon as you'd like, and you'll find yourself off into the grass. So trying to get to full throttle by the end of the curbing, really, at this point, and still in fourth gear, taking fourth gear all the way through here, and then running the speed out. You can use all of the yellow curbing here to the right. And you're going to be full throttle for fourth gear all the way up into the chicane. So let's watch that once more at speed. So approaching the chicane, you want to get the car up to the left as much as you can. I actually went a little too far maybe here and took a little bit more grass than I typically do, but to show that you can actually put a tire off into the grass if you had to, you can do so without an off track. And it's okay here because I'm not turning away. If I'm turning away while I have a tire in the grass, that's going to spell trouble. But maybe we'll get away with that there. But I did run a little wider than I would typically like to. And turning in at this point, aiming to use all of the curbing to the right, still full throttle. And now just as I cross that curbing, just getting on brake, about 50% brake, and getting prepared to not touch the curbing here that you see initially, but the curbing afterward. And really intending to use all of the curbing here to the left. And again, probably a little more than necessary. You can see the tires are off into the grass. There's no off track, but you can ride around the curbing here to the left. You really want to keep the car to the left. You want to sacrifice the exit and set up for the keyhole. The keyhole is arguably the most important corner on the track, and so getting a good exit for the keyhole for the straight, getting on throttle as soon as possible is real important. That's your best passing zone on the track, and even if you can't pull off a pass, chances are you're going to be alongside the opponent, and you'll maybe go side by side up around China Beach, which we did a fair amount last season. So a lot of fun battling side by side through that area of the track. So we'll get to that there in a second. So setting up for the straight, coming up on the keyhole, what I aim to do is come up right up to the curbing here to the right, but then actually let the car run just a little wide. Braking real quick, 40 to 50% braking here, and then turning in. You can see I'm letting the car run a little wide. You can use the darker patch of asphalt here as a reference for kind of where you want to get the car out to. And the reason this helps, rather than hugging the curbing there to the right, is that you can get the car rotated and back to full throttle just a little sooner by doing so. So just real light throttle already at this point. In fact, if you look at this as kind of a midpoint for the corner where you can start to get back on throttle just a little bit, then that's ideal, I think. And then you're actually now gauging how much you need to slow the car to rotate it to get back on throttle, right around the end of the curbing. And so you'll see I'm actually coasting a little bit. You may be doing just a little trail braking here. But now already at this point, as I feel like I've got the car now closing to the right, now I'm back on throttle, and I'll slowly get back to full throttle. It takes me a bit, and now finally at full throttle. So the sooner you can get to full throttle, the better. But doing so too soon, you've really got to be patient with not only the exit and the late apex, but also getting back to full throttle. It's easy to make the mistake of just getting a little too eager for that, feeling like you're ready to go to full throttle a little too soon, and that's the place where you can spin and end up maybe even running wide. So on the exit, you can see I'm actually pointed. Let's see, straightening up the wheel, starting to straighten up the wheel here, and really just kind of pointed to run wide here and use the curbing on the left on exit. You can see how much there is used. And of course, full throttle all the way down straight. Okay, so setting up for the turn into China Beach, the China Beach section of the track. I don't know the actual corner number, but braking probably starts at about the 300, although I'm not consciously thinking of that. What I'm consciously thinking of doing is getting threshold braking just before the 200. And so what you'll see is threshold braking happening right about there, and real hard initial braking. It's a hard braking zone, and you want to slow the car quickly so that you can now get, the balance of the car, more time to kind of get the car balanced back out for the next turn in here. So you can see starting to brake right about where you can see the 300. But again, I'm not thinking about that. You can see I'm just getting quick threshold braking and using the 200 really as a reference for that. It's a little awkward for me using a reference. It's a little far off to the left. You can look at kind of the lighter patches in the asphalt as a reference, but if you're right up on the back end of another car, you're going to have trouble spotting that. So maybe having a couple of different reference points is good. A common mistake here is to brake late when you have draft, and then you're off into the sand trap. So be very careful with that when you are when you've got extra speed from the draft. And if you're running side by side here, which will happen a lot, this is the most common passing zone of the track, and so it's typically difficult to complete the pass prior to the end of the straight, and so what you'll find yourself doing is going too wide into this corner, and you'll actually find yourself running too wide all the way through this section of the track potentially. There were a few races where Tapani and myself ran too wide, really all the way up to this point of the track from the end of the straight, and a lot of fun. It's either car has the potential to complete the pass, just on managing those corners better than the other. But I think the inside line, from my experience and from my preference, if you're going to defend and if you're going to take the inside line, I think you have a better chance of coming out in the lead in the end. And so defend on the inside would be my preference. You can turn in, and your opponent's going to be on the left-hand side, and of course you're going to have to take the wider line, but you can actually carry just a little more speed taking the wider line around this corner, and you're going to find yourselves side by side once again. And this is where the inside line, I think, will typically come out ahead in this particular corner. So anyway, just a little tip there on traffic and passing. So you want to be pretty well off the brakes at the point of turn in and maybe trail braking. And so you'll see I'll start to come off and maybe doing just a little bit of trail braking here. By the time I reach this curbing, and you can use it, I actually probably used a little more than I would like. You can see the car takes a little bit of a bounce, but getting back to throttle at this point. Now you're going to sacrifice your exit a little bit. You don't want to run too wide to the left because you're now setting up the next section. back on throttle already, and now braking just a bit, real quick, maybe 40% brake, and turning in. Just keep this nice and snug to the left. So you may trail brake a little bit there if you find yourself running a little wide. And again, back on throttle now at this point. You can use all of this curbing, and the car is not unsettled much at all. So you can use all of that, and depending on how you feel with it. In this instance, I was carrying enough speed that I really couldn't have gotten that tight to the left, and probably ran just a little wide. But getting back to throttle at the point of kind of as you get close to the top of the hill, but not too much throttle. Obviously, the car's going to lighten up as it comes up over this crest. A little bit of light throttle. Then you might get back to full throttle briefly here. But now already aiming to get the car right up onto the left here, right as it comes to the base of the hill. So braking and turning in right as you kind of come down to the base of the hill there. Real quick, 30% brake and then turning in. You can use the darker patch of asphalt as a reference to where your line should be. I like to use all of the curbing here to the right because I feel like I can carry a little bit more speed that way. Car handles it nicely. And again, I don't want to run too wide here. This is another area of the track where you've really got to set up the exit. I think this is called the jump right over here. So if you find yourself using too much of this curbing, you may find yourself taking an awkward line up over the jump. And you really want the tires pointed straight with the camber of the road. And you can see that as I reach that point, this is where the car is going to really kind of lighten up, and you get loose. If you're at full throttle or nearly full throttle like I am here, and the car is turning or is kind of hitting this at an awkward angle, then you're going to have a lot of trouble. And this is just the first section of this 3-part corner here that you've really got to nail it consistently, or you end up losing a lot of speed coming into Thunder Valley. So, and another way that I know that I'm running the right line is if I'm aiming to not touch the curbing. I don't like to come over the curbing to the right. Staying to the left of that helps me know that the car is aiming to come out to the left here. Now, you don't need to come all the way down to the curbing here to the left. Some like to. I've seen some lines run where all of the curbing is used to the left, a little bit later turn-in is used, and maybe a little earlier on the throttle. And I can see why you would like to do that, because you can get a straighter run. And again, this is an area where as you come up over this crest, the more at an angle the car is, the more likelihood of losing it. And so you've got to be extremely careful with throttle coming up over the crest of that hill. Not really reaching full throttle until I'm down on the downhill side of that. So there are some different ways to hit that corner, but I think that this corner here and this corner here are getting the right line through those two corners really will help set you up for this following corner, which I would argue is probably, or I'll predict, this is where most people are going to lose the car. And especially with race fuel, the car with all the extra weight from the fuel is even harder to keep control of if you don't hit this just right. So as far as braking goes, let's see here. So full throttle at this point and getting ready for the braking zone here. Now there's a couple of transitions that the car kind of goes through as you come around this corner. You want to give the car a little bit of time to settle. And if you treat it as one continuous turn, then at least from my experience, it doesn't really get settled, and you end up sliding a bit trying to come up around the next corners. So I like to let the car have a little bit of time to get settled. So the sooner I can get it over here to the left and straighten back out, you'll see I'll try to get the wheel to the point where I can nearly straighten it back out. Give it a little bit of time to settle, and braking just before the curbing there to the left, maybe 40% or so. Get the car settled, a little bit of time. And now turning in, and I'm aiming to use all of the curbing here to the right. A little bit of trail braking to make sure I can reach that. And then as soon as I reach that, starting to roll back on throttle, but not getting back to the full throttle until I'm up and over the crest of the hill here. And you can see the car, once again, similar to the earlier example, starts to get a little bit loose. And you can see that's really just right up on the limit of how much throttle I could give it, and maybe just slightly too much. So I get a little bit of a wobble there. You can see about where that limit is there. Okay, so coming up on the next corner, keeping the car to the right up next to the guardrail as close as you can. And I would use the I don't know, between the 200 and the grass is your braking point. About 40% braking here, and kind of a late turn in. You can use all of the curbing to the left. This is where I have often had an off track. Any more than what I just took here, with just maybe a little bit of grass, will be an off track. So I've had some laps, qualifying laps, lost due to just a very slight clipping of too much grass there. So be careful of that. But you can use pretty much all of this curbing if you come across that to the left. Back to throttle right away. Again, aiming to get back on throttle just as that curbing is crossed. And again, try not to stay too close or hug this too much to the right. Really kind of aiming down the middle, and give yourself a little bit of space, because what you're now doing is setting up for a good throttle and a good early throttle and exit onto the straight. So you can actually run a little wider than this. I find that it's not real necessary to run any wider than this. But if you look at the darker patch of asphalt here, I start to really look at that line is coming right up close to where the little corner of this asphalt. That's kind of where I want to get the car pretty close to that. And then again, back to throttle as I reach this curbing here. Real light. And then getting back to full throttle from here. Maybe again a lift. You can see I'm shifting as well at that point. It's a good time to both lift and shift, because if you try to carry full throttle all the way through here, the car can get real loose and you'll be off into the grass. So that's a good shift point. Let's play that through at speed. So not really to the middle, but leaving a little bit of space to the right. You don't want to run that too tight. Let the car run a little wide initially. And then coming back in, making sure you're at least touching the curbing here to the right to make sure you're not running too wide, and that's where you're back on throttle. All right, so that's a lap. Hope this is helpful. Talk to you later.